On this week's episode of History and Relics, we're going to share with you some of the greatest accomplishments of, and quotes from, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and we'll be taking you to his and his wife Coretta's final resting place at the National Historical Park in Atlanta, Georgia. Please join us on our journey as we pay our respects to a great leader, a great American, and a great human being, right here on History and Relics. King was born Michael Luther King in Atlanta on January 15, 1929, but later renamed Martin, and was one of three children born to Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. King Sr. was a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, while Alberta was a schoolteacher. Martin Luther King Jr. went on to college, where he received a bachelor's degree in 1948, followed by attending Crozer Theological Seminary. He later completed his coursework for his doctorate and received his Ph.D. in 1955. Just 2 years earlier, in June 1953, King married Coretta Scott in Marion, Alabama. The couple would later have 4 children. Martin Luther King became best known as a national hero and civil rights figure whose nonviolent presence for many causes grew strong in the mid-1950s through the late 1960s. In March and April of 1968, his last efforts were focused on bringing about national attention on the plight of the poor and unorganized sanitation workers striking in the city of Memphis, Tennessee, who wanted basic union representation and better wages. King was in Memphis on Wednesday, April 3, 1968, preparing for a nonviolent march scheduled for the following Monday on behalf of the striking sanitation workers. The next day, Thursday, April 4th, King prepared to leave the Lorraine Motel for dinner at the home of Memphis minister Samuel Billy Kiles. Before leaving and upon stepping out of his second-story motel room, number 306, and onto the balcony, he stopped to speak with some colleagues from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference who were standing in the parking lot below. He was accompanied by Jesse Jackson and Ralph Abernathy. Just then, a shot rang out from the rooming house across the street from the motel, which struck King in the head. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, where doctors later pronounced him dead. President Lyndon B. Johnson called for a national day of mourning to be observed on April 7th. The next day, April 8th, King's widow, Coretta Scott King, and other family members joined thousands of participants in a march in Memphis, honoring King and supporting the sanitation workers. King's funeral service was held in Atlanta at Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was attended by many of the nation's political and civil rights leaders, including Jacqueline Kennedy and Vice President Hubert Humphrey. Over 100,000 mourners gathered on the streets of Atlanta for King's funeral procession on April 9, 1968. King's body was initially interred at Southview Cemetery, but was eventually moved to a crypt next to the Ebenezer Church at the King Center, an institution founded by King's widow. As for the assassin, it was James Earl Ray who later confessed and was eventually sentenced to 100 years behind bars, and is where he later died on April 23, 1998, at the age of 70. During King's funeral, a tape recording was played in which King spoke of how he wanted to be remembered after his death. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King tried to give his life serving others. And that's exactly what he did. And now, let that be our segue into sharing with you some of his greatest accomplishments. On December 1, 1955, an African-American woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white person and was arrested due to racial segregation laws. This led to the Montgomery bus boycott, which was planned by E.D. Nixon and led by Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott lasted 385 days, and during this time, King was arrested. His home was bombed, and he was subject to personal abuse and threats. The protest ended in December 1956 when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. King was the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, and was one of the leaders of the Big Six civil rights organizations who organized the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The march took place in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963. It was a resounding success, with over 250,000 participants, making it one of the largest political rallies for human rights in U.S. history. It also motivated other marches and laid the stepping stone to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. During the March on Washington, Martin Luther King delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to a gathering of more than 250,000 people. In the speech's most famous passage, King departed from the written text at Mahalia Jackson's cry, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." The speech is considered the defining moment of the American Civil Rights Movement and was ranked the top American speech in a 1999 poll of scholars. On October 14, 1964, King received the Nobel Peace Prize for leading nonviolent resistance to racial prejudice in the United States. At the age of 35, he was the youngest recipient of the award at that time. King was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's success with nonviolent activism. His trip to India made him understand nonviolent resistance better, and he was convinced that that was the way forward for achieving civil rights for American blacks. King was hugely successful in achieving his goals using nonviolent means. This enhanced the stature of nonviolent methods of protest throughout the world. And now, let us share with you our recent visit to Martin and Coretta's grave sites at the King Center located in Atlanta next to the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our program. If you like our content, we ask that you give us a thumbs up, a like, share with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you always know when our new content is published. And all of this costs nothing, but means a lot to us and keeps us growing. You may also leave us a tip if you choose. The address is provided here on your screen, and a link is provided in the description area below. So until next time, everyone, this one is history. Hey, and be sure to check out our eBay store under ID, History and Relics. We're now featuring channel merchandise, starting with our new logo magnet. They're only $5.50, and net proceeds go towards supporting our channel.